You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. Folks, breaking news out of Pennsylvania. Well, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court today threw out the conviction of comedian Bill Cosby. 3 years ago, he was convicted of assault, and he was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison. Well, they ruled today that the decision to prosecute him was wrong. Why? Because he previously, with another prosecutor, agreed not to pursue criminal charges against him in exchange for him speaking in a civil deposition, in a civil trial. What that meant was that in that particular civil deposition, he could not declare his Fifth Amendment rights to self-incrimination. The court ruled today that as a result of that agreement not to prosecute him, which then caused him to give up those rights, that was wrong, and that the new prosecutor who campaigned specifically that he would prosecute Bill Cosby, he should have honored that previous commitment. It was a shocking turn of events. Not only the decision comes down today, Bill Cosby this afternoon was freed from prison. What I want to do right now is I want to bring up our panel. First and foremost, Monique Presley, crisis manager and lawyer, A. Scott Bolden, of course, a former head of the National Bar Association Political Action Committee. I want to talk with them first. Monique, I'll start with you. Was today's decision by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturning lower court's ruling, was it a shock to you? You previously represented Bill Cosby in this particular case. You were one of several lawyers, but your thoughts on today's decision by the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court?
They did the right thing. And what I said on December 31st, 2015 is the same thing that I have to say today, and that the Supreme Court ultimately said. When a prosecutor makes a promise and a defendant or potential defendant relies on the promise to his own detriment, that cannot stand. The original prosecutor, made a promise, declined to prosecute, and induced the testimony of Mr. Cosby in a civil case because of that assurance. But for that, he would have had the opportunity, and certainly the lawyers then would have advised him to plead the Fifth. He would have remained silent because there was the potential out there for a criminal charge in that case. Bruce Castor's decision eliminated that as a possibility, supposedly. And then you fast forward 12 years to a new prosecutor who somehow decides that if the person who's sitting in the seat of government wants to do something different because the times call for something different, or because it's an election season and he wants to win, then he doesn't have to honor what a prior prosecutor promised and what a potential defendant relied upon. It was absurd from the outset and should not have occurred. And so what the Supreme Court said about it is that that cannot happen, that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has to adhere to the promises of its officers where its citizens have relied on those promises. And that's what we saw today.
There's been a lot of people who have been commenting, a lot of people who have been saying this is an outrage, that Bill Cosby should not have been free from prison. Scott Bolden, this was a 79-page decision rendered by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Your judgment on today's decision? Scott, we have no audio, so please unmute yourself.
Sorry. It was the law, and the Supreme Court, in a 79-page decision, which means they were very intentional about this, said, regardless of what you think about Bill Cosby and the 5 or 6 women or the dozens of women who he allegedly was wrongfully acted with, the bottom line is they tricked him into giving up his Fifth Amendment and then tried him years later that violated his due process rights. I agree with Monique. It's pretty pretty standard fare. I have a Fifth Amendment right. If I cut a deal to give it up with a prosecutor, another prosecutor 12 years later can't come up and say, I'm not going to honor that deal. The other thing to remember, Roland, about this is that the Supreme Court could have taken a slightly different position. I believe the other issue pending before the court vis-a-vis whether the probative value of those other women being led into the second trial outweighed the prejudicial effect. I think the court would have ruled that it was too prejudicial. And had they ruled on that second issue, first issue was the violation of the due process. Had they ruled on the second issue versus the first issue, they could have sent it back down to be retried. But instead, they intentionally said, we're going to deal with the due process piece, because if he violated his due process rights and you tricked him into giving up his Fifth Amendment and you prosecuted him, then the other women and how the trial went are moot and don't really matter. And so they chose to attack this case like that, so that one, they vacated the judgment, cannot be retried, and then they discharged him. Case over, bottom line. And he's at home at 79 years old, and there are a lot of people who disagree with the court's decision, but the law doesn't serve one side or the other. It just serves the law and the judicial system. And this was the right thing to do, it was the right legal decision to make. And the rest of it on politics and perceptions, people can have their opinions, but this was the right call by the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania.
Well, first, Cosby is 83, so I'm sure he would appreciate you shaving 4 years off of his age there, Scott.
He's a cute, too.
He's 83 years old. But Monique, to Scott's point about how the law works regardless of who you are, the critics say Bill Cosby got a sweetheart deal by this prosecutor, Bruce Castor, choosing not to pursue charges. In reading the 79-page document from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, they laid out where he stated that he did not believe that he could actually get a conviction because of inconsistencies in Andrea Constant's testimony, also no physical evidence and the time gap between it, and that he gave many statements where he also said that he wanted to be some measure of justice, which as a result of this decision required Bill Cosby to have to answer all questions during this civil case. There were 4 depositions he sat for during the civil case, and then at one point he did answer some questions. They went to the court, and the court said, yes, as a result of the previous agreement, you have to answer these questions. And there are a lot of people out there who are saying that this decision vindicated Bill Cosby, or that Bill Cosby was declared innocent. That's actually not what this decision rendered actually says, correct?
No, it doesn't have to say that. It says that he shouldn't be charged in the first place. It says wash it all away as if the trial never happened. Somebody in this country is still innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. You can't be proven guilty on something you never should have been charged with in the first place. So people can say in language whatever they want, whatever way they want, but I see a lot of people, even legal folks, calling this a technicality. To me, again, absurd. How is someone inducing you to waive essentially your Fifth Amendment right to not be incriminated against, and that be called a technicality when it is the direct cause of things that happen later? So anyone who doesn't think that they have a liberty interest at stake will answer questions that any lawyer would first say, don't do it, if they thought that there was any possibility of a trial. So what I think about now is that people who understand the law and respect it should replace Mr. Cosby with any given defendant. Replace him with your son, with your husband, with your brother. We try one case at a time, and the obligation in the justice system is to do it when it's right to do it. So imagine your family member being made a promise that they relied on by the government. That promise is supposed to stand. We need justice to apply the same for every single person in every single case, and that's to administer it fairly.
To that particular point there, Scott, as I went through this ruling, this 79-page ruling, that was the one thing that the court kept coming back to. They kept coming back to saying the fact that Bruce Castor, as a prosecutor, carries a lot of power, a lot of weight, and that his decision had to be respected. That once that once a defendant gets this word, and even though there were claims that, well, it was not actually written down or it wasn't actually formalized, they concluded that as an agent of the court, if you will, that look, that carries a lot of weight when he says we are not going to prosecute you criminally. Therefore, as a part of this agreement, you must testify civilly. What they're saying is that, look, in other words, what Monique said, that frankly, if Bill Cosby did not have that agreement, he's not speaking truthfully or answering all questions in the civil. So if Bill Cosby didn't get that agreement, we actually would not have any testimony of him actually speaking on the record about quaaludes and sex and drinks, things along those lines.
And it was an interesting deal. I mean, we've been at this a long time, Monique and I. I've never seen a prosecutor do this type of deal. But they did the deal, and the court recognized that. But remember why Castor did it this way. He could not prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. He could not, and he announced he couldn't, and that he was going to do this deal where he was going to allow to say he will never be prosecuted or not prosecuted. And in exchange for that, he will give civil testimony, and ultimately that case settled for $3 or $4 million. It didn't have to be in writing. I'm an officer of the court. Castor was an officer of the Pennsylvania State Court and the prosecutor. That does carry weight. A deal's a deal, as I've been saying on social media, and you can't unwind the deal because you don't like the discretion of that prosecutor. And so here, it's even more egregious because in exchange for him giving up his Fifth Amendment, he agreed to testify. And that's what Castor wanted because there was going to be a civil settlement. The prosecutors cut deals like this all the time vis-a-vis, they know a civil case is out there. Here, Castor structured this deal to get him to give up his Fifth Amendment. He gave it up because Castor knew he couldn't prosecute him criminally because what? There wasn't enough evidence. So on the first trial, there wasn't enough evidence. And then the second trial, they brought in these other prior bad acts, allegedly, these other women. They let in 5 or 6, and then you get the conviction. That's not due process. That's not fundamental fairness. And that's just a bad jury verdict based on what's underlying all of this.
And there were a lot of people, obviously, Monique, who were also critical of the fact that that deposition that was taken, he sat for four different sessions. A deposition was leaked or inadvertently exposed publicly, which then put it in the public record. If that doesn't happen, then publicly, we don't have even that in the trial, correct?
I don't know. Or maybe I know things I can't say. But here's my point.
First of all, for anybody who's paying attention, even though she is formerly Bill Cosby's attorney, the attorney-client privilege requirement still stands. So that's why there are some things she cannot talk about. Go ahead.
Right. And other things that I just will not talk about because I think there just is an obligation of confidentiality. So anything that I'm commenting is publicly available. It's things I said publicly then, things that were in trial, or things that others have already commented on publicly. To Scott's point, I think it's really important that this Supreme Court had the option to reverse and remand, had the option on the other issue, and I think they would have. I think that the decision by the judge in one trial to not let in that testimony, and then when it hangs, comes back in the second trial and basically opens a barnyard door and says, "Come one, come all, tell your story." That made the difference in the trial, and the Supreme Court likely would have found that, but they decided instead, no. We are taking it all the way to the beginning. before the first trial, when there were charges on December 30th, 2015. That is the decision that was wrong. And so it's not a decision by Castor that was wrong in making the deal. Prosecutors have all the discretion in the world. It was the decision by Steele to not honor it that was violative of Mr. Cosby's rights. If you just think about the way prosecutors come up with plea agreements and then the court ratifies those agreements, what if the prosecutor 10 years later decides the day before your little brother is supposed to get out of prison on a deal that was 10 out of a 10 to 20 possibility, we shouldn't have offered that. That's too low. We think he did some other things. We can't get him for the other things, so we're going to stack on more time here. Are you kidding me? No, that cannot be the way that our justice system works. And I am thankful that the Supreme Court sent that message very clearly today.
And for the people who don't understand, the last line in the court's opinion is that accordingly, we do not address Cosby's other issue. That other issue they're talking about is the judge allowing other women to testify, speaking to his character. That was one of the complaints the Cosby attorneys made, that their testimony should not have been allowed in. People also got to remember, the first Cosby trial ended in a mistrial. He was convicted in the second trial. It was in the second trial when the judge allowed those women to actually testify. And so you had lots of different things that were going on here. Back to that Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment.
Racial injustice is a scourge on this nation, and the Black community has felt it for generations. We have an obligation to do something about it. Whether it's canceling student debt, increasing the minimum wage, or investing in Black-owned businesses, the Black community deserves so much better. I'm Nina Turner, and I'm running for Congress to do something about it.